September 2025 joins the past few months following Season 2 as a time of uncertainty. But what we can be sure of is the releases that we did have. Welcome to this month on Doctor Who. Kicking off September 2025 on the 2nd, we had two very unique releases. Off the bat, we had the first story in the First Doctor Unbound series, Knights of the Round TARDIS by L.R. Hay, featuring David Bradley as the Unbound First Doctor, Claudia Grant, Jamie Glover, and Gemma Powell as Susan, Ian, and Barbara, respectively. Set in 13th century Oxford, the TARDIS team must prevent time from becoming unbound by the meddling monk, which is presumably why this has been released as part of the long-running Unbound series. Despite it seeming like a regular First Doctor adventure, the events of this story potentially alter the continuity of these familiar characters. The following parts will be released January 2026 and May 2027, which is very odd to have the first two within a handful of months of each other and the final part nearly a year and a half later. Also on the 2nd, we had the Monster Makers graphic novel Standard Edition. The limited edition was published on the 19th of August and limited to 350 copies. It collects the first 3 Doctor Who magazine comic strips that feature the 15th Doctor and Ruby Sunday, as well as a bonus comic strip with the 14th Doctor from issue 598. These are always really interesting to pick up if you are not a regular Doctor Who magazine reader. I remember when I collected the comics featuring the 14th Doctor after Jodie Whittaker regenerated back into David Tennant, just because I wanted to know, obviously. I thought maybe it would be important to know what happened after they regenerated, and then eventually they released it as a graphic novel, Liberation of the Daleks, and I just wasted a lot of money. On the 4th of September, we got the final 2 stories in series 14 of the 4th Doctor Adventures, Conspiracy of Silence by Jonathan Morris and The Last Queen of the Nile by David K. Barnes, featuring Tom Baker as the 4th Doctor and Louise Jameson and John Leeson as Leela and K9 respectively. These 2 stories mark the end of the 14th series. The TARDIS team investigate a silent mystery on an oil rig with an appearance from the Brigadier, and then travel back to ancient Egypt where they encounter the likes of Mark Antony, Caesar, and Cleopatra. The Audible audiobook of the upcoming Doctor Who and the Loch Ness Monster by Terence Dix was also released on the 4th of September, read by John Culshaw, and to be released on CD on the 16th of October. This completes every story from the Daleks to Rose in BBC audiobook form, with notably An Unearthly Child in rights limbo with presumably you-know-who. It was meant to be released, I think, back in 2013, and then some things happened in the business side of stuff, and then a lot of you will know the rest of the story, but the son of the original writer of An Unearthly Child claims a lot of the copyright for that story, and it's a bit of a mess really. Jumping ahead to the 9th, the second story in the new 12-part 13th Doctor Adventures, The Return of the Doctor by Rory Thomas Howes, featuring Jodie Whittaker as the 13th Doctor and Mandip Gill as Yaz. The duo return to a planet that they just saved, only to find the locals are in turmoil. This story follows the notable story Vampire Weekend, being the audio debut for both Jodie Whittaker and Mandip Gill, and will be followed by Lionesses in Winter by Lisa McMullen in November, where the duo travel back to 1183 and meet King Henry II during his family Christmas. A couple days later, on the 11th, issue 621 of Doctor Who magazine was released, with a focus on Jodie Whittaker's 13th Doctor, and ties in nicely with her return to Doctor Who in audio form. There are interviews with Jodie's era showrunner Chris Chibnall, Attack the Block writer and director Joe Cornish, Jesse Armstrong, writer of The Entire History of You, the phenomenal Black Mirror episode with Jodie Whittaker, and co-creator of Peep Show and Fresh Meat, as well as the creator of Succession. There's also Toxic Town creator Jack Thorne, also known for the This Is England series, Enola Holmes, and Adolescence. And finally, about 24 pages of Jodie Whittaker herself. She talks primarily about the reality war and her secret return in Ncuti's final moments, and her thoughts on Billie Piper returning at the end. As well, of course, her entire time as the Doctor and the people that she got to work with, alongside all the controversies and negativity she experienced during her tenure, such as her being cast as the first female Doctor and the controversial Timeless Child arc. I would recommend picking up this issue if it's just for Jodie's interview. It's full of interesting tidbits, and Jodie Whittaker always approaches Doctor Who with a joy that is just intoxicating, even just to read. The rest of the magazine includes part 5 of the comic story His Mad Pranks with the 15th Doctor and Belinda, and 13 lessons in Doctor Who from Chris Chibnall. On the same day, the 96th release of the Big Finish Torchwood monthly range, Salvage, written by Yanto actor Gareth David Lloyd, was released. Twins Esther and Cody stumble upon the remains of the iconic Torchwood SUV in a junkyard of alien artifacts, and it takes them on a unique Torchwood adventure. And again on this day, Dracula by Paul Mars, released in paperback by BBC Children's Books and Puffin as the 8th entry in the Puffin Classics crossover range that began in June 2021 with Legends of Camelot and The Wonderful Doctor of Oz. This novel features the first Doctor, Ian and Barbara, and adapts the famous character of Count Dracula. This is potentially the final of these releases, with Paul Mars stating that his next proposal would have been Troughton and Mrs. Mills versus the War of the Worlds. Jumping ahead a bit, on the 15th, Big Finish announced the release of the 4th series of the Second Doctor adventures, The Potential Daleks, for release in December. They really struggled with the title on this one, huh? The Potential Daleks, really? The Second Doctor, played by Michael Troughton, alongside Fraser Hines and Wendy Padbury as Jamie and Zoe respectively, encounter a sentient nursery rhyme in Humpty Dumpty by Nicholas Briggs, a seemingly peaceful village in Secret of the Daleks by Mark Wright, and an impending invasion against their old friends the Morai from the previous series Conspiracy of Raven in War of the Morai by Mark Wright and Nicholas Briggs. A day later, on the 16th, the second inclusion to the 9th series of Big Finish's Lost Stories range, Alixion by Robin Mukherjee, was released. Initially considered for season 26 as a spare script until being considered for season 27 as Sylvester McCoy's departure story, McCoy stars here alongside Sophie Aldred as Ace as they land at a luxury health spa before finding themselves preventing the plan of evil alien beetles. If you were interested in learning a little bit more about the unmade 7th Doctor stories, feel free to have a gander at my old video on the ill-fated season 27. On the 18th, the final part of Big Finish's Dark Gallifrey Master series, written by Lizzie Hopley and starring Eric Roberts as the Master, was released. Following the other parts of this series from July and August, we followed the Master and his monstrous experiment on a group of Time Lord Academy students. In this final installment, Paul McGann's 8th Doctor appears to put a stop to the Master. 1001 Nights in Time and Space by Stephen Cole and Paul Mars is released in hardback by BBC Books. It's a collection of short stories mixing folktales and Doctor Who in a similar style to the Time Lord fairy tales released in 2015. The title expands on that of the historical texts of 1001 Nights, a collection of Middle Eastern folktales. A 5-CD audio reading was released by BBC Audio on the same day, with narration by Susan Twist, Dan Starkey, Maureen O'Brien, and Louise Jameson. BBC Audio released a 2 LP version of the Moonbase soundtrack on the 19th, previously released all the way back in April 2001 and remastered in the Lost TV Episodes Collection 3 box set in August 2011 and March 2020. Also on the 19th, Big Finish announced the next release in December for the 8th Doctor Adventures, with a 2-story box set entitled Empty Vessels. With Eos Falling by Matt Fitton and Lure of the Zygons by Roy Gill, starring Paul McGann as the 8th Doctor, Nicola Walker as Liv Chenka, and Hattie Morahan as Helen Sinclair. On the 22nd, Big Finish announced the second series of the Space Security Service series, which follows the Space Security Service. Lots of S's. The Space Security Service were originally from the Daleks' master plan, of which Sarah Kingdom was a part of, and whose sister is the protagonist in this series. In this 3-story release, we see the return of Bret Vyon, so of course it's titled Bret Vyon Lives! The Bret Vyon being the agent that Nicholas Courtney played before being the Brigadier in later seasons. I would really love to tell you more, but that would mean I have to keep going on about this, and I sometimes really wonder whether Big Finish has too much money. Speaking of, the next day, 2 Big Finish audio stories in the New Adventures of Bernice Summerfield, Volume 9, The Dalek Entity 1, were released. The Lonely Bomb by James Goss and Satrap by Felice Barker. These stories are a tribute to the iconic Dalek Empire series and see Benny fighting the Daleks on battlefields and ruined worlds, and I can't be the only person who is surprised that this series is still going. You know, I had a look and it would cost someone over £600 to listen to all the Bernice Summerfield audio stories, and that's only downloads. Lisa Bowerman has been playing this character longer than I have been alive. And this is a separate issue, but how does Big Finish charge £3 less for these two stories, that being $8.99, than if you bought the first two stories of the original Bernice Summerfield series from 1998? Even if you bought all of series 1 for the advertised £24, it would still be an equivalent £8 for the first two. That series is over 25 years old, and all you're paying for is a couple of files. Series 2 of Big Finish's Call Me Master series, entitled Monsters, was released on the 25th of September, featuring Sacha Dhawan as the Master as he encounters the Interstellar Protection Corps in The Craft of Corruption by Alison Winter, a disgraced Sontaran played by, of course, Dan Starkey in The Ideal Quarry by Titan Comics writer Jodie Hauser, and a Reformation Chamber in Reformation by Lisa McMullen. Also on the 25th, the official Doctor Who quiz book by Beth Axford was released in hardback by BBC Children's Books. Beth Axford previously wrote an unofficial Doctor Who quiz book in 2022. Since then, she has come to write officially for Doctor Who, such as for this quiz book, an inclusion in the 2024 anthology book The Adventures Before, but also for an upcoming BBC audiobook called Firefall, and as an editor on a couple of the previously mentioned Puffin Classics range. A day later, on the 26th, BBC announced the release of a new Companion Chronicles box set for release in February 2026. The Legacy of Time revisits the 2019 20th anniversary 6-part release of the same name and tells two stories of the first two Doctors and what they were up to during this massive event. In The Kraken of Hagwell by Barbara Hamley, the first Doctor, played by Stephen Noonan, lands into a confrontation between the Brigadier, the Master, and his pet Kraken. And then in The Heartless Sea by Simon Guerrier, the second Doctor, played by Michael Troughton, meets Harry Sullivan and Naomi Cross in an investigation in the haunted Warehouse 9. We're nearly there. On the 29th of September, we saw the standard release of the Collection Season 20 Blu-ray box set, just over 2 years after its limited edition release. Up next for the standard edition treatment is likely Season 15. On the 30th, another installment of the much-loved and definitely highly requested show, The Whoniverse Show, was released. Saw host Crystal D and Tyrell Charles with special guest Tia Kofi explore famous locations around Cardiff, talk to Beth Axford about the official Doctor Who quiz book, as well as Pete McTeague on his Lucky Day prequel as seen in the Doctor Who Annual 2026. Circling right back around to the beginning, also on the 30th of September, we had the announcement of the second story in the trilogy of the First Doctor Unbound series, with Return to Marinus by Jonathan Morris, set for release in January 2026. As the title suggests, the same TARDIS team return to Marinus a century after the Keys of Marinus and find it a bit too perfect. With the conscience machine removing free will, how can the Doctor put a stop to it and the Daleks? So there you have it. 8 Big Finish releases, 4 Big Finish announcements, 3 books, 1 graphic novel, an audiobook, a magazine, a vinyl, a Blu-ray, and an online episode of a show no one asked for. This would set back a dedicated Whovian at least £240. But what releases did you pick up, if any? And what did you think of it? Were you particularly tickled by the Doctor and Cleopatra, entranced by the soundscape of the Moonbase, humbled by the official Doctor Who quiz book? Let me know how you feel about these releases, and if there's any upcoming releases that you're particularly interested in.